Hi guys, welcome to part 12. Now this is the last section and the ending of book 1, and then I will start uploading book 2, and I appreciate everybody's patience as I get these up. Just remember to click the like button and the bell button, and you'll get notified when I put up another section and when I start putting up book 2. So we're finishing up, kind of going through the last 25,000 years of our 3D planet here as we move into fourth density positive polarization. Now, we do get a little bit more into why haven't aliens landed on like the White House lawn, and how come it's so spotty and shady and we just don't have disclosure yet. And the major reason for that, and they do discuss it a little bit in this next section, is that we are under a quarantine, a protective quarantine by, people that are actually governing 6 and above density beings that are governing this planet. And so it's not perfect. I've talked about this before, and there's almost like these random window effects where different entities can either pierce the quarantine through thought, so they can actually contact people here through thought. Now, for us, say if, some people say they see an alien or they saw aliens in their bedroom, or they have these like close encounters. A lot of those are through thought. They're not actually here in physical self. Some people feel like they've been abducted by aliens, but a lot of those abductions are through thought. Not all of them. It's very rare. And the thing is, some of them get permission to break the quarantine. So they're not, like the Orion group. Sometimes the Orion group is allowed to come here if they kind of ask for permission, and they're able to do a lot of things. So they were trying to kind of explain that in this next section. So I just wanted to touch on that. And the thing that I really do want to talk about, because we're at the very end of this, last 25,000 year section, is the speed of which our planet is changing and things are changing, and how come we have so many wanderers coming here. We are having things happen on this planet that have almost happened kind of before. And this was during the Atlanteans. So the Atlanteans were misusing their crystal technologies, and it's almost like setting off bombs and warring, and they sunk entire islands using their crystal technology. So civilizations were lost because it was like a bunch of kids with a gun that didn't know how to use it and didn't understand the damage that they were doing. Well, guess what happened, in this past century? We came up with the atomic bomb. Now, Nikola Tesla was a wanderer. He was sent here, or he volunteered to come here to try to give humanity free energy. But unfortunately, we had, negatively polarized entities here as well that debunked pretty much everything he tried to give humanity. But a lot of his teachings and workings did spill into a lot of different things. Unfortunately, one of those was things like the Manhattan Project and the Philadelphia Project. So Nikola Tesla was involved in both of those, and he backed out because Nikola Tesla was a positively oriented sixth dimensional being. Now, they were using his knowledge and for bad, for negative. Now, the thing that was really, and I want you guys in this next session to kind of really, this is something that is talked about by Dolores Cannon a lot in all of her books, and that is when the atomic bombs went off Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Now, they do talk a little bit about how the people that died during those bombs, like not in the radiation and the effects that happened afterwards, but we're talking the instant death that shattered them. This is not a normal death, how deaths are supposed to go, because we are eternal souls. So when we die, we get reincarnated here as part of expansion. Like the whole point of the law of one, the whole point of the universe, the whole point of everything experiences is expansion. We're supposed to expand experiences, expand our growth, our self, our knowledge, and the universe is expanding. We're co-creating and creating new worlds. Like, this is all part of expansion. But when those bombs got dropped on those cities, it was like a retraction, which is very actually rare to have a retraction so much, because it shook humanity. It ripped time and space. The souls that were in those bombs were almost completely lost, like true death, where you don't get reincarnated, you don't ascend, you're lost. So the Confederation is still, they said, Ra is still working on finding and trying to almost put together those souls again and find them and guide them, because they're lost in between densities. They're lost in between universes. They're still working on bringing them back, because when you're get ripped out of life like that, like in a bomb, it's not like being in a normal death. It's not like you have time to transition, almost like worlds and leave entities. You get lost a little bit. And I really don't want to get too long-winded in this, but the way I know of it and the downloads that I have gotten about this topic are, if you think about like a ghost that hasn't moved on, they're still trying to hang on to their one life out of thousands of lives that they've had on this planet, and they don't want to let go and ascend. They're trying to finish something that they did in just that one lifetime, but eventually, they will always move on, right? And sometimes that happens for the most part when an entity was wronged and killed wrongly, and say they were murdered or shot or something, so they died in a car accident, so they something like that. So they don't want to ascend and leave their family and not know what happened, and they don't know they're dead sometimes. You hear these stories a lot. Now, this is kind of rare that happens in that way. But if you die in a nuclear explosion, it really rips you out of this density and you're lost. You don't know which way is forward or back. And so there's almost like these higher dimensional beings from above 6 density that are coming here and ascending, trying to help all those kind of souls that got ripped apart and lost. And they are, I guess, kind of cleaning up the mess, the spiritual damaging mess that was created when those 2 bombs went off, and they're still cleaning it up. Okay, so they're not just like lost ghosts, like they're trying to bring their vibration of light back into a density so they can go back into 3D. It really did send the call throughout the entire universe, and that's why so many light workers and wanderers are here right now to help with the harvest, to help positively orientating our planet into 4th density, because we cannot let a bomb like that, a nuclear bomb, descend on our planet again, because it is a retraction instead of an expansion of the universe. And that is like the whole point of the law of one. We're all connected. And when those bombs got dropped, it affected everybody. We have so many wanderers here right now, because the more wanderers that we have on our planet, the higher vibration we can make the planet and everyone on it. And a way to think of that is, if we feel the emotions of our fellow man, even if they're on the other side of the planet, we would not be able to drop another bomb on them like that, because it would hurt ourselves. This is kind of what being an empath is. You feel the pain and the joy and the emotions and the attachment, the law of one, attachment to everybody else. So the higher we can bring up the vibration, and the higher that we can have almost all of humanity feel each other, we would never do anything like that again. Sorry I went off a little bit there. I just really wanted to bring in some of the knowledge that I have from other things that I've read and the downloads that I have gotten, to try to really bring this up about what it really meant when those atomic bombs got dropped, and how it was a huge echo through all densities and the entire universe, because it was a retraction. It's an important message to get across. That's enough of me talking. Let's get into this last section of the Law of One.
The Law of One, Book I, Session 24. February 15, 1981. Ra, I am Ra. I greet you in the love and in the light of the infinite Creator. We communicate now. Questioner, we are a little concerned about the physical condition of the instrument. She has a slight congestion. If you can tell me of the advisability of the session, I would appreciate it. Ra, I am Ra. This instrument's vital energies of the physical complex are low. The session will be appropriately shortened. Questioner, in the last session you mentioned that in this last 25,000-year cycle the Atlanteans, Egyptians, and those in South America were contacted and then the Confederation departed. I understand that the Confederation did not come back for some time. Could you tell me of the reasons, consequences, and attitudes with respect to the next contact with those here on planet Earth? Ra, I am Ra. In the case of the Atlanteans, enlargements upon the information given resulted in those activities distorted towards bellicosity which resulted in the final second Atlantean catastrophe 10,821 of your years in the past, as you measure time. Many were displaced due to societal actions both upon Atlantis and upon those areas of what you would call North African deserts to which some Atlanteans had gone after the first conflict. Earth changes continued due to these, what you would call, nuclear bombs and other crystal weapons, sinking the last great land masses approximately 9,600 of your years ago. In the Egyptian and the South American experiments results, though not as widely devastating, were as far from the original intention of the Confederation. It was clear to not only us but also to the Council and the Guardians that our methods were not appropriate for this particular sphere. Our attitude thus was one of caution, observation, and continuing attempts to creatively discover methods whereby contact from our entities could be of service with the least distortion and above all with the least possibility of becoming perversions or antitheses of our intention in sharing information. Questioner, thank you. Then I assume that the Confederation stayed away from Earth for a period of time. What condition created the next contact that the Confederation made? Ra, I am Ra. In approximately 3,600 of your years in the past, as you measure time, there was an influx of those of the Orion group, as you call them. Due to the increasing negative influences upon thinking and acting distortions, they were able to begin working with those whose impression from olden times, as you may say, was that they were special and different. An entity of the Confederation, many thousands of your years in the past, the one you may call Yahweh, had, by genetic cloning, set up these particular biases among these peoples who had come gradually to dwell in the vicinity of Egypt, as well as in many other places, by dispersion after the down-sinking of the landmass Mu. Here the Orion group found fertile soil in which to plant the seeds of negativity, these seeds, as always, being those of the elite, the different, those who manipulate or enslave others. The one known as Yahweh felt a great responsibility to these entities. However, the Orion group had been able to impress upon the peoples the name Yahweh as the one responsible for this elitism. Yahweh then was able to take what you would call stock of its vibratory patterns and became, in effect, a more eloquently effective sound vibration complex. In this complex the old Yahweh, now unnamed, but meaning he comes, began to send positively oriented philosophy. This was approximately, in your past, of 3,300 years. Thus, the intense portion of what has become known as Armageddon was joined. Questioner, how did the Orion group get through the quarantine 3,600 years ago? The random window effect? Ra, I am Ra. At that time this was not entirely so, as there was a proper calling for this information. When there is a mixed calling the window effect is much more put into motion by the ways of the densities. The quarantine in this case was, shall we say, not patrolled so closely, due to the lack of strong polarity, the windows thus needing to be very weak in order for penetration. As your harvest approaches, those forces of what you would call light work according to their call. The ones of Orion have the working only according to their call. This calling is in actuality not nearly as great. Thus, due to the way of empowering or squares there is much resistance to penetration. Yet free will must be maintained and those desiring negatively oriented information, as you would call it, must then be satisfied by those moving through by the window effect. Questioner, then Yahweh, in an attempt to correct what I might call a mistake, I know you don't want to call it that, started 3,300 years ago a positive philosophy. Were the Orion and Yahweh philosophies impressed telepathically, or were there other techniques used? Ra, I am Ra. There were two other techniques used, one by the entity no longer called Yahweh, who still felt that if it could raise up entities which were superior to the negative forces, that these superior entities could spread the law of one. Thus this entity, Yod-He Shin Vav-He, came among your people in form according to incarnate being and mated in the normal reproductive manner of your physical complexes, thus birthing a generation of much larger beings. These beings called Anak. The other method used to greater effect later in the scenario, as you would call it, was the thought form such as we often use among your peoples to suggest the mysterious or the sublime. You may be familiar with some of these appearances. Questioner, could you state some of those? Ra, I am Ra. This is information which you may discover. However, we will briefly point the way by indicating the so-called wheel within a wheel and the cherubim with sleepless eye. Questioner, did the Orion group use similar methods for their impression 3,600 years ago? Ra, I am Ra. The group or empire had an emissary in your skies at that time. Questioner, can you describe that emissary? Ra, I am Ra. This emissary was of your fiery nature which was hidden by the nature of cloud in the day. This was to obliterate the questions of those seeing such a vehicle and to make it consonant with these entities' concept of what you may call the Creator. Questioner, and then how was the information passed on to the entities after they saw this fiery cloud? Ra, I am Ra. By thought transfer and by the causing of fiery phenomena and other events to appear as being miraculous through the use of thought forms. Questioner, then are there any prophets that sprang from this era or soon after it that are recorded? Ra, I am Ra. Those of the empire were not successful in maintaining their presence for long after the approximate 3000 date in your history and were, perforce, left with the decision to physically leave the skies. The so-called prophets were often given mixed information, but the worst that the Orion group could do was to cause these prophets to speak of doom. As prophecy in those days was the occupation of those who love their fellow beings and wish only to be of service to them and to the Creator. Questioner, are you saying that the Orion group was successful in polluting some of the positively oriented prophets' messages with prophecies of doom? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct. Your next query shall be the last full query for this session. Questioner, could you tell me why the Orion group had to leave after what figures to be a 600-year period? Ra, I am Ra. Although the impression that they had given to those who called them was that these entities were an elite group, that which you know as diaspora occurred, causing much dispersion of these peoples so that they became an humbler and more honorable breed, less bellicose and more aware of the loving kindness of the one Creator. The creation about them tended towards being somewhat bellicose, somewhat oriented towards the enslavement of others, but they themselves, the target of the Orion group by means of their genetic superiority weakness, became what you may call the underdogs, thereby letting the feelings of gratitude for their neighbors, their family, and their one Creator begin to heal the feelings of elitism which led to the distortions of power over others which had caused their own bellicosity. Any short queries may be asked now. Questioner, is there anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? Ra, I am Ra. You are conscientious. Be careful to adjust this instrument's upper appendages if its upper body is elevated. I am Ra. All is well. It is our joy to speak with you. We live in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. Session 25. February 16, 1981. Ra, I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite Creator. We communicate now. Questioner, we shall now continue with the material from yesterday. You stated that about 3,000 years ago the Orion group left due to diaspora. Was the Confederation then able to make any progress after the Orion group left? Ra, I am Ra. For many of your centuries, both the Confederation and the Orion Confederation busied themselves with each other upon planes above your own, shall we say, planes in time-space whereby machinations were conceived in the armor of light girded. Battles have been and are continuing to be fought upon these levels. Upon the Earth plane, energies had been set in motion which did not cause a great deal of call. There were isolated instances of callings, one such taking place beginning approximately 2,600 of your years in the past in what you would call Greece, at this time, and resulting in writings and understandings of some facets of the law of one. We especially note the one known as Thales and the one known as Heraclitus, those being of the philosopher career, as you may call it, teaching their students. We also point out the understandings of the one known as Pericles. At this time there was a limited amount of visionary information which the Confederation was allowed to telepathically impress. However, for the most part, during this time empires died and rose according to the attitudes and energies set in motion long ago. not resulting in strong polarization but rather in that mixture of the positive and the warlike or negative which has been characteristic of this final minor cycle of your beingness. Questioner, you spoke of an Orion Confederation and of a battle being fought between the Confederation and the Orion Confederation. Is it possible to convey any concept of how this battle is fought? Ra, I am Ra. Picture, if you will, your mind. Picture it then in total unity with all other minds of your society. You are then single-minded, and that which is a weak electrical charge in your physical illusion is now an enormously powerful machine whereby thoughts may be projected as things. In this endeavor the Orion group charges or attacks the Confederation armed with light. The result, a standoff, as you would call it, both energies being somewhat depleted by this and needing to regroup, the negative depleted through failure to manipulate, the positive depleted through failure to accept that which is given. Questioner, could you amplify the meaning of what you mean by the failure to accept that which is given? Ra, I am Ra. At the level of time-space at which this takes place in the form of what you may call thought war, the most accepting and loving energy would be to so love those who wish to manipulate that those entities were surrounded and engulfed, transformed by positive energies. This, however, being a battle of equals, the Confederation is aware that it cannot, on equal footing, allow itself to be manipulated in order to remain purely positive, for then though pure it would not be of any consequence. Having been placed by the so-called powers of darkness under the heel, as you may say. It is thus that those who deal with this thought war must be defensive rather than accepting in order to preserve their usefulness and service to others. Thusly, they cannot accept fully what the Orion Confederation wishes to give, that being enslavement. Thusly, some polarity is lost due to this friction and both sides, if you will, must then regroup. It has not been fruitful for either side. The only consequence which has been helpful is a balancing of the energies available to this planet so that these energies have less necessity to be balanced in this space-time, thus lessening the chances of planetary annihilation. Questioner, does a portion of the Confederation then engage in this thought battle? What percent engages? Ra, I am Ra. This is the most difficult work of the Confederation. Only 4 planetary entities at any one time are asked to partake in this conflict. Questioner, what density are these 4 planetary entities? Ra, I am Ra. These entities are of the density of love, numbering 4. Questioner, would an entity of this density be more effective for this work than an entity of density 5 or 6? Ra, I am Ra. The 4th density is the only density besides your own which, lacking the wisdom to refrain from battle, sees the necessity of the battle. Thus it is necessary that 4th density social memory complexes be used. Questioner, am I correct in assuming that both the Confederation and the Orion group utilize only their 4th densities in this battle, and that the 5th and 6th densities of the Orion group do not engage in this? Ra, I am Ra. This will be the last full question as this entity's energies are low. It is partially correct. 5th and 6th density entities positive would not take part in this battle. 5th density negative would not take part in this battle. Thus, the 4th density of both orientations join in this conflict. May we ask for a few short questions before we close? Questioner, I will first ask if there is anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable. I would also really like to know the orientation of the 5th density negative for not participating in this battle. Ra, I am Ra. The 5th density is the density of light or wisdom. The so-called negative service to self-entity in this density is at a high level of awareness and wisdom and has ceased activity except by thought. The 5th density negative is extraordinarily compacted and separated from all else. Questioner, thank you very much. We do not wish to deplete the instrument. Is there anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? Ra, I am Ra. You are very conscientious. As we requested previously, it would be well to observe the angles taken by the more upright posture of the entity. It is causing some nerve blockage in the portion of the body complex called the elbows. I am Ra. I leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, then, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. Session 26. February 17, 1981. Ra, I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite Creator. I communicate now. Questioner, is any of the changing that we have done here going to affect communication with the instrument in any way? Is what we've set up here all right? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, do you mean that everything is satisfactory for continued communication? Ra, I am Ra. We meant that the changes affect this communication. Questioner, Should we discontinue communication because of these changes, or should we continue? Ra, I am Ra. You may do as you wish. However, we would be unable to use this instrument at this space-time nexus without these modifications. Questioner, assuming that it is all right to continue, we're down to the last 3,000 years of this present cycle, and I was wondering if the law of one in its written or spoken form has been made available within this last 3,000 years in any complete way such as we are doing now? Is it available in any other source? Ra, I am Ra. There is no possibility of a complete source of information of the law of one in this density. However, certain of your writings passed on to you as your so-called holy works have portions of this law. Questioner, does the Bible that we know have portions of this law in it? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, can you tell me if any of the Old Testament has any of the law of one? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, which has more of the law of one in it, the Old Testament or the New Testament? Ra, I am Ra. Withdrawing from each of the collections of which you speak the portions having to do with the law of one, the content is approximately equal. However, the so-called Old Testament has a larger amount of negatively influenced material, as you would call it. Questioner, can you tell me about what percentages of Orion influence in both the Old and New Testaments? Ra, I am Ra. We prefer that this be left to the discretion of those who seek the law of one. We are not speaking in order to judge. Such statements would be construed by some of those who may read this material as judgmental. We can only suggest a careful reading and inward digestion of the contents. The understandings will become obvious. Questioner, thank you. Have you communicated with any of our population in the third density incarnate state in recent times? Ra, I am Ra. Please restate, specifying recent times and the pronoun you. Questioner, has Ra communicated with any of our population in this century, in the last, say, 80 years? Ra, I am Ra. We have not. Questioner, has the law of one been communicated in the last 80 years by any other source to an entity in our population? Ra, I am Ra. The ways of one have seldom been communicated, although there are rare instances in the previous 80 of your years, as you measure time. There have been many communications from fourth density due to the drawing towards the harvest to fourth density. These are the ways of universal love and understanding. The other teachings are reserved for those whose depth of understanding, if you will excuse this misnomer, recommend and attract such further communication. Questioner, then did the Confederation step up its program of helping planet Earth sometime late in this last major cycle? It seems that they did from previous data, especially with the Industrial Revolution. Can you tell me the attitudes and the reasonings behind this? Is there any reason other than they just wanted to produce more leisure time in the last, say, 100 years of the cycle? Is this the total reason? Ra, I am Ra. This is not the total reason. Approximately 200 of your years in the past, as you measure time, there began to be a significant amount of entities who by seniority were incarnating for learned teaching purposes rather than for the lesser of the learned teachings of those less aware of the process. This was our signal to enable communication to take place. The wanderers which came among you began to make themselves felt at approximately this time, firstly offering ideas or thoughts containing the distortion of free will. This was the prerequisite for further wanderers which had information of a more specific nature to offer. The thought must precede the action. Questioner, I was wondering if the one, Abraham Lincoln, could have been a wanderer? Ra, I am Ra. This is incorrect. This entity was a normal, shall we say, Earth being which chose to leave the vehicle and allow an entity to use it on a permanent basis. This is relatively rare compared to the phenomenon of wanderers. You would do better, considering the incarnations of wanderers such as the one known as Thomas, the one known as Benjamin. Questioner, I am assuming that you mean Thomas Edison and Benjamin Franklin? Ra, I am Ra. This is incorrect. We were intending to convey the sound vibration complex, Thomas Jefferson. The other, correct. Questioner, thank you. Can you tell me where the entity who used Abraham Lincoln's body, what density he came from and where? Ra, I am Ra. This entity was fourth vibration. Questioner, I assume positive? Ra, I am Ra. That is correct. Questioner, was his assassination in any way influenced by Orion or any other negative force? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, thank you. In the recent past of the last 30 to 40 years the UFO phenomena have become known to our population. What was the original reason for the increase in what we call UFO activity in the past 40 years? Ra, I am Ra. Information which Confederation sources had offered to your entity, Albert Einstein, became perverted, and instruments of destruction began to be created, examples of this being the Manhattan Project and its product. Information offered through Wanderer, sound vibration, Nikola, also was experimented with for potential destruction, example, your so-called Philadelphia experiment. Thus, we felt a strong need to involve our thought forms in whatever way we of the Confederation could be of service in order to balance these distortions of information meant to aid your planetary sphere. Questioner, then what you did, I am assuming, is to create an air of mystery with the UFO phenomenon, as we call it. And then by telepathy send many messages which could be accepted or rejected under the law of one so that the population would start thinking seriously about the consequences of what it was doing. Is this correct? Ra, I am Ra. This is partially correct. There are other services we may perform. Firstly, the integration of souls or spirits, if you will, in the event of use of these nuclear devices in your space-time continuum. This the Confederation has already done. Questioner, I don't fully understand what you mean by that. Could you expand on that a little bit? Ra, I am Ra. The use of intelligent energy transforming matter into energy is of such a nature among these weapons that the transition from space-time third density to time-space third density, or what you may call your heaven worlds, is interrupted in many cases. Therefore, we are offering ourselves as those who continue the integration of soul or spirit complex during transition from space-time to time-space. Questioner, could you give us an example from Hiroshima or Nagasaki of how this is done? Ra, I am Ra. Those who are destroyed, not by radiation, but by the trauma of the energy release, found not only the body-mind-spirit complex made unviable, but also a disarrangement of that unique vibratory complex you have called the spirit complex, which we understand is a mind-body-spirit complex, to be completely disarranged without possibility of reintegration. This would be the loss to the creator of part of the creator, and thus we were given permission, not to stop the events, but to ensure the survival of the, shall we say, disembodied mind-body-spirit complex. This we did in those events which you mention, losing no spirit or portion or holograph or microcosm of the macrocosmic infinite one. Questioner, could you tell me just vaguely how you accomplished this? Ra, I am Ra. This is accomplished through our understanding of dimensional fields of energy. The higher or more dense energy field will control the less dense. Questioner, then you are saying that, in general, you will allow the population of this planet to have a nuclear war and many deaths from that war. But you will be able to create a condition where these deaths will be no more traumatic than entrance to what we call the heaven worlds or the astral world due to death by a bullet or by the normal means of dying by old age. Is this correct? Ra, I am Ra. This is incorrect. It would be more traumatic. However, the entity would remain an entity. Questioner, can you tell me the condition of the entities who were killed in Nagasaki and Hiroshima at this time? Ra, I am Ra. They of this trauma have not yet fully begun the healing process. They are being helped as much as is possible. Questioner, when the healing process is complete with these entities, will this experience of death due to nuclear bomb cause them to be regressed in their climb towards fourth density? Ra, I am Ra. Such actions as nuclear destruction affect the entire planet. There are no differences at this level of destruction, and the planet will need to be healed. Questioner, I was thinking specifically if an entity was in Hiroshima or Nagasaki at that time and he was reaching harvestability at the end of our cycle. Would this death by nuclear bomb create such trauma that he would not be harvestable at the end of the cycle? Ra, I am Ra. This is incorrect. Once the healing has taken place, the harvest may go forth unimpeded. However, the entire planet will undergo healing for this action, no distinction being made betwixt victim and aggressor, this due to damage done to the planet. Questioner, can you describe the mechanism of the planetary healing? Ra, I am Ra. Healing is a process of acceptance, forgiveness, and, if possible, restitution. The restitution not being available in time-space, there are many among your peoples now attempting restitution while in the physical. Questioner, how do these people attempt this restitution in the physical? Ra, I am Ra. These attempt feelings of love towards the planetary sphere and comfort and healing of the scars and the imbalances of these actions. Questioner, then as the UFO phenomenon was made obvious to many of the population, many groups of people were reporting contact and telepathic contact with UFO entities and recorded the results of what they considered telepathic communication. Was the Confederation oriented to impressing telepathic communication on groups that were interested in UFOs? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct, although some of our members have removed themselves from the time-space using thought-form projections into your space-time, and have chosen, from time to time, with permission of the Council, to appear in your skies without landing. Questioner: then are all of the landings that have occurred with the exception of the landing that occurred when, name, was contacted of the Orion group or similar groups? Ra: I am Ra. Except for isolated instances of those of, shall we say, no affiliation, this is correct. Questioner: is it necessary in each case of these landings for the entities involved to be calling the Orion group, or do some of these entities come in contact with the Orion group even though they are not calling that group? Ra: I am Ra. You must plumb the depths of fourth density negative understanding. This is difficult for you. Once having reached third density space-time continuum through your so-called windows, these crusaders may plunder as they will, the results completely a function of the polarity of the, shall we say, witness, subject or victim. This is due to the sincere belief of fourth density negative that to love self is to love all. Each other self which is thus either taught or enslaved thus has a teacher which teaches love of self. Exposed to this teaching, it is intended there be brought to fruition and harvest of fourth density negative or self-serving mind-body-spirit complexes. The following material, from Session 53, May 25, 1981, was added for clarity. Questioner: can you tell me of the various techniques used by the service to others positively oriented Confederation contacts with the people of this planet, the various forms and techniques of making contact? Ra: I am Ra. We could. Questioner: would you do this, please? Ra: I am Ra. The most efficient mode of contact is that which you experience at this space-time. The infringement upon free will is greatly undesired. Therefore, those entities which are wanderers upon your plane of illusion will be the only subjects for the thought projections which make up the so-called close encounters and meetings between positively oriented social memory complexes and wanderers. Questioner: could you give me an example of one of these meetings between a social memory complex and a wanderer as to what the wanderer would experience? Ra: I am Ra. One such example of which you are familiar is that of the one known as Morris 3. In this case, the previous contact which other entities in this entity's circle of friends experienced was negatively oriented. However, you will recall that the entity, Morris, was impervious to this contact and could not see with the physical optical apparatus, this contact. However, the inner voice alerted the one known as Morris to go by itself to another place, and there an entity with the thought form, shape and appearance of the other contact appeared and gazed at this entity, thus awakening in it the desire to seek the truth of this occurrence and of the experiences of its incarnation in general. The feeling of being awakened or activated is the goal of this type of contact. The duration and imagery used varies depending upon the subconscious expectations of the wanderer which is experiencing this opportunity for activation. Questioner: in a close encounter by a Confederation type of craft, I am assuming that this close encounter is with a thought form type of craft. Do wanderers within the past few years have close encounters with landed thought form type of craft? Ra: I am Ra. This has occurred, although it is much less common than the Orion type of so-called close encounter. We may note that in a universe of unending unity the concept of a close encounter is humorous, for are not all encounters of a nature of self with self? Therefore, how can any encounter be less than very, very close? Questioner: well, talking about this type of encounter of self to self, do any wanderers of a positive polarization ever have a so-called close encounter with the Orion or negatively oriented polarization? Ra: I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner: why does this occur? Ra: I am Ra. When it occurs, it is quite rare and occurs either due to the Orion entity's lack of perception of the depth of positivity to be encountered or due to the Orion entity's desire to, shall we say, attempt to remove this positivity from this plane of existence. Orion tactics normally are those which choose the simple distortions of mind which indicate less mental and spiritual complex activity. Questioner: I have become aware of a very large variation in the contact with individuals. Could you give me general examples of the methods used by the Confederation to awaken or partially awaken the wanderers they contact? Ra: I am Ra. The methods used to awaken wanderers are varied. The center of each approach is the entrance into the conscious and subconscious in such a way as to avoid causing fear and to maximize the potential for an understandable subjective experience which has meaning for the entity. Many such occur in sleep, others in the midst of many activities during the waking hours. The approach is flexible and does not necessarily include the close encounter syndrome, as you are aware. Questioner: what about the physical examination syndrome? How does that relate to Wanderers and Confederation and Orion contacts? Ra, I am Ra. The subconscious expectations of entities cause the nature and detail of thought form experience offered by Confederation thought form entities. Thus, if a wanderer expects a physical examination, it will, perforce, be experienced with as little distortion towards alarm or discomfort as is allowable by the nature of the expectations of the subconscious distortions of the wanderer. Questioner: well, are those who are taken on both Confederation and Orion craft then experiencing a seeming physical examination? Ra, I am Ra. Your query indicates incorrect thinking. The Orion group uses the physical examination as a means of terrifying the individual and causing it to feel the feelings of an advanced second density being such as a laboratory animal. The sexual experiences of some are a subtype of this experience. The intent is to demonstrate the control of the Orion entities over the Terran inhabitant. The thought form experiences are subjective and, for the most part, do not occur in this density. Questioner: then both Confederation and Orion contacts are being made and close encounters are of a dual nature as I understand it. They can either be at the Confederation or of the Orion type of contact. Is this correct? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct, although the preponderance of contacts is Orion-oriented. Questioner: well, we have a large spectrum of entities on Earth with respect to harvestability, both positively oriented and negatively oriented. Would the Orion group target and on the ends of this spectrum, both positively and negatively oriented, for contact with Earth entities? Ra, I am Ra. This query is somewhat difficult to accurately answer. However, we shall attempt to do so. The most typical approach of Orion entities is to choose what you might call the weaker-minded entity that it might suggest a greater amount of Orion philosophy to be disseminated. Some few Orion entities are called by more highly polarized negative entities of your space-time nexus. In this case they share information just as we are now doing. However, this is a risk for the Orion entities due to the frequency with which the harvestable negative planetary entities then attempt to bid and order the Orion contact just as these entities bid planetary negative contacts. The resulting struggle for mastery, if lost, is damaging to the polarity of the Orion group. Similarly, a mistaken Orion contact with highly polarized positive entities can wreak havoc with Orion troops unless these crusaders are able to depolarize the entity mistakenly contacted. This occurrence is almost unheard of. Therefore, the Orion group prefers to make physical contact only with the weaker-minded entity. Questioner: then in general we could say that if an individual has a close encounter with a UFO or any other type of experience that seems to be UFO-related, he must look to the heart of the encounter and the effect upon him to determine whether it was Orion or Confederation contact. Is this correct? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct. If there is fear and doom, the contact was quite likely of a negative nature. If the result is hope, friendly feelings, and the awakening of a positive feeling of purposeful service to others, the marks of Confederation contact are evident. End of material from Session 53, May 25, 1981. Questioner: then I am assuming all of the groups getting telepathic contact from the Confederation are high-priority targets for the Orion Crusaders, and I would assume that a large percentage of them are having their messages polluted by the Orion group. Can you tell me what percentage of them had their information polluted by the Orion group and if any of them were able to remain purely a Confederation channel? Ra, I am Ra. To give you this information would be to infringe upon the free will or confusion of some living. We can only ask each group to consider the relative effect of philosophy in your so-called specific information. It is not the specificity of the information which attracts negative influences. It is the importance placed upon it. This is why we iterate quite often, when asked for specific information, that it pales to insignificance. Just as the grass withers and dies while the love and the light of the one infinite Creator redounds to the very infinite realms of creation forever and ever, creating and creating itself in perpetuity. Why then be concerned with the grass that blooms, withers and dies in its season only to grow once again due to the infinite love and light of the one Creator? This is the message we bring. Each entity is only superficially that which blooms and dies. In the deeper sense there is no end to beingness. Questioner: as you have stated, it is a straight and narrow path. There are many distractions. We have created an introduction to the Law of One, traveling through and hitting the high points of this 75,000-year cycle. After this introduction I would like to get directly to the main work, which is an investigation of evolution. I am very appreciative and feel a great honor and privilege to be doing this and hope that we can accomplish this next phase. Ra, I am Ra. I leave you, my friends, in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, then, merry and glad and rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai.
And that concludes the Law of One Raw Material Book 1. And I will be putting up Book 2. I want to thank everyone for listening. And the last note that I want to talk about at the end of this section, as what I believe to be a wanderer myself, and I know a lot of people here that are listening are wanderers, or the people that suspect that they are wanderers, or those that want to talk to their higher self or tap in to the law of one. And the thing that Ra was talking about is that our spirit guides, our higher self, those of us that are part of us, that are in different dimensions, that are trying to communicate with us or that are guiding or with us, the way that they communicate is through our subconscious. So because we're attached, it's not like they're far off, millions of miles out into space. It's instant. The communication can be instant. And you have to remember that we have free will, and that is law that cannot be broken. So our higher selves, our spirit guides, are not able to just come out and say, here I am, or, here's my apparition, here's my energy, and, because that would freak us out, because we have the veil of forgetfulness, we have free will. Now, so we have to invite our higher self to come in order for them not to be able to break the free will that we have. So those of you that are listening to these tapes that think that you're a wanderer or a light worker, or, it doesn't really matter all the different names that are out there for this. If you want to really move forward and get downloads from the Akasha records and speak to your higher self, the first thing that you have to do is use your free will to beckon it and give almost permission to receive downloads and set intentions. And that is the way your higher self will communicate with you. And it will be through your subconscious while you're dreaming, while you're in a meditative state. And it's like your intuition, when you have those thoughts and feelings that come with it that you did not necessarily beckon yourself, they came from some deeper self-knowing subconscious, that is them trying to communicate. And you just have to practice tapping into that and practice listening and practice beckoning and giving permission for it to come freely in. And these are some of the practices as we go through book 2, 3, 4, and 5. These are some of the daily practices as you finish and go through these recordings and this material. That is what I encourage everyone to do. I've gotten a lot of messages about people that believe that they're wanderers or light workers, and they want more. They want to hear their higher self. They want to get downloads. They want to understand this knowledge. And there are higher beings that are very willing to help. They want to help, but you have to ask and give permission, because they're not allowed to break your free will. Okay, so that is what I'm going to leave you with. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to Book 1. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell notifications so you'll be notified when I put up Book 2. And I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you, everyone.